him.
I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Schmack-a-magab, it's time for the only news that matters. And choosing a favorite Beatles album is an almost impossible task, given that fans' preferences can change daily. The Fab Four crafted a timeless body of work that serves as a perfect soundtrack for every conceivable emotion or moment. As a result, picking just one record often falls short of capturing the breadth of their brilliance. Despite being an active group for less than a decade, the Beatles made themselves one of the most prolific and potent bands ever. They released 16 full-length records for their fans and delivered a relentless, profitable stream of pure pop gold. The group would grow and evolve from their boy band roots into something more unique, transcending genres, music, and fandom to become the most revered band of all time. For any new listener, this comprehensive career can feel incredibly daunting to try and unpack. Still, once they start, it's an alluring endeavor that can often be addictive. Due to the Beatles enjoying such a pioneering stint in music, it's natural for it to be a challenging to highlight and a particular moment in their career's trajectory of eras, let alone a singular album. However, one individual who did raise his head above the water to reveal his favorite record by the Fab Four is the overrated Beatle, George Harrison, who knew more about the matter than most. As he often and affectionately known as the Quiet Beatle, the overrated Beatle, George Harrison, could be more accurately described as a too often overlooked Beatle by people like me. And there's a cause to be made, for there's no better guitarist and singer combination in the history of rock music. What the hell? Except, of course, for perhaps John Lennon, one of the finest songwriters of his generation. Harrison's track, like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, I hate that song. And Here Comes the Sun, I love that one, cemented him in the pop music pantheon. However, Harrison grew frustrating toward the end of the Beatles' tenure, as his songwriting contributions were often ignored, despite being on the higher standard than many efforts higher standards for many efforts provided by Lennon and McCartney. Is this guy who wrote this on drugs? Nevertheless, his status within the group was elevated as the years went on. Even though Harrison could have been brought closer to the forefront, therefore, for his favorite Beatles album, you may have thought Harrison would have picked the White Album. After all, it does include 4 of his own compositions. And by the way, I love all 4. I love 3 of them. I just didn't like for While My Guitar Gently Weeps, because he's the overrated Beatle. Anyway, the overrated Beatle was quite famously not a fan of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and he felt the concept album had turned them into a set of puppet worker bees rather than a genuine artist. Says it's become an assembly process, just little parts and then overdubbing. He once said, believing as though the band had lost the edge that came with the live performances. It was part of what resulted in the Beatles' infamous split, as in the end, George Harrison, the overrated Beatle, and Lennon were keen to move back to being an actual band rather than just a recording outfit. This drive permeated much of Harrison's career, with and without the Fab Four. With his views on acoustic integrity in places, it feels right that George Harrison's favorite LP would reflect a time of creative unknowns and artistic challenges. It was also the album critics defined as making the turning point. He said, "Rubber Soul was my favorite album. Even at that time, I think it was the best one we made." On one hand, it could be easy to see that the first moment Harrison broke into his own right and viewed that this is why he held Rubber Soul above the rest of their back catalog. However, Harrison didn't have a selfish bone in his body. In reality, he loved the album for a different reason. The late guitarist once explained the most important thing about it was that we were suddenly hearing sounds we weren't able to hear before. Also, we were being more influenced by other people's music, and everything was blossoming at the time, including us. Rubber Soul is one of the most experimental of the Beatles albums. It reflects a moment of unbridled creativity within the band, sparking a feeling that would ignite the rest of the Fab Four's subsequent output. Arguably, this was when they transcended from pop sensation into musical icons. The record was built on a heavy dose of avant-garde rock and roll, yet unlike the previous efforts, this album was not a hit machine. According to John Lennon, it was all rather simple process. He said, "We were just getting better technically and musically, that's all." Finally, we took over the studio. In the early days, we had to take what we were given. We didn't know how you can get more bass. We were learning the techniques on Rubber Soul. We were more precise about making this album, that's all. And we took over the cover and everything. John Lennon always was talking down about the Beatles. That's all. We just made music history. We're like the most important band ever. That's all. I'm doing better in my solo career. So he thought. Anyway, more than any album in their canon up to that point, Rubber Soul was about challenging themselves as musicians and pushing their audiences too. Furthermore, George Harrison also pushed this aspect forward with his work at every step of his career and refuses to rest on his laurels. While Rubber Soul may not be the Beatles' best album objectively, unless you're talking to me, I'll tell you it's the best album. It's provided them with a taste of experimentation, which allowed the Fab Four to continue evolving with each album. Alright, there you go. And I know some of you are wondering, what the hell's wrong with you? Why would you call George Harrison the underrated Beatle? I mean, it would be Ringo, right? No, man, I dig Ringo, bro. I love Ringo more than George. Now, don't get it twisted and let's cut the deck. I think George Harrison has done some great things in the Beatles. Even the early stuff when he wasn't really a songwriter yet, I think it was his first song to appear on an album called Don't Bother Me that was written by him, but I know he sang Chains on Please Please Me, and I love his voice on Chains, But then there's a lot of songs I didn't like. I didn't like the stuff he did after that until the White Album. I didn't like the songs on any of them, really, until Piggies, and stuff like that. And I thought his best work in the Beatles was the last two songs on Abbey Road. Something, I think, is his greatest song. And then Here Comes the Sun, unbelievably awesome, right? But everything else, especially when he got into the sitar, no thank you. I can't get into that. He ruined Sgt. Pepper for me. I like every song on that album but his. And also those stupid songs on Magical Mystery Tour. I'm sorry, I'm not a George Harrison fan. And then when he went solo, oh yes, everybody says All Things Must Pass is the greatest solo Beatles album. To you, I tried. Man, what's the hype about? I keep trying to listen to that long ass album, and it's nothing on it like catches me. Me, when it comes to solo stuff, Paul McCartney. I love Ringo's solo stuff too. John, I can make one album out of all the songs I like off his solo career. You know, to me, John was my favorite Beatle. He is my favorite Beatle still till today. My favorite. But then when he left the Beatles, even before he left the Beatles, he did some great stuff after White Album. Like I Love Come Together, She's So Heavy. I know there's a few other ones. Maybe a song or two. But nothing as good as what he did from White Album down. You know, like, you know, I'm So Tired, Walrus, you know, Day in a Life, In My Life. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. And Paul had an amazing track of songs that he did in the Beatles, you know. And I would put Paul's Beatles stuff over his solo stuff. But as far as when it comes to solo Beatles, and I have investigated all four, hands down, George Harrison's my least favorite Beatle, man. Not into his solo stuff. Now, he did one in the 80s that I thought was all right. All those years ago, it was okay. That one's like the only solo song I like from that I've heard. And I've heard quite a few George Harrison solo albums. And sorry, man, McCartney owns them all. That's how I feel. But, you know, I know a lot of people out there love Harrison. A lot of people say Harrison's their favorite Beatle, and the greatest solo album was done by Harrison, and so on. Hey, that's great you think that. I don't. I find him very overrated, you know, because he's a Beatle. And I think Ringo's underrated. Ringo rules. You know, and we all that think he's a crappy drummer. Look at all these great drummers out there. Greg Bissonette, Mike Portnoy. You know, all these amazing drummers all point to Ringo, how amazing Ringo was. But then there's people, you know, that don't play drums like me, and we think we're experts. You know? Now, I also got to say that this overrated Beatle, to me, not to you, to me, his favorite Beatles album is Rubber Soul. My favorite Beatles album. So there you go. Even though he did an interview on that Beatles anthology where he wasn't sure what was on what, he got Rubber Soul confused with Revolver. And sometimes they confuse me too, because they are like sister albums. But yeah, I forgot about Taxman, which is on the next album, Revolver. That's a great, great song. But here on Rubber Soul, I'd have to go What Goes On is probably my least favorite, which is, you know, Ringo Starr, but Lennon and McCartney wrote it. And then I would say Think For Yourself, not a fan. The other song on Rubber Soul is If I Needed Someone, which is a slight improvement. I don't think it's a great song, but it's a slight improvement. Taxman is freaking awesome. Absolutely love Taxman, but everything else on Revolver, let me take a look at Revolver now. Let's see what he did on Revolver. Other than Taxman, I know Taxman I freaking love, but what else did he do? He did Love You Too, hate it, don't like it. And I Want to Tell You, which is almost okay. It's like whatever. And then it just got worse there with Sgt. Pepper, Magic Mystery. That's like the worst era for Harrison, for me, with all the stupid sitars. Where the sitar on Norwegian Wood is perfect. You know, I think it blends perfectly. Anyway, that's my Beatles nerdism. All you Beatles nerds out there, George Harrison fans, because I know there's nobody out there that thinks George Harrison's overrated, except me and my co-host of the Rock and Metal Combat Podcast, Ian Wadley, he thinks like I do. I think he hates Harrison even a little more than I do, but he does like While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So there you go. We cancel each other out, but we both feel that Ringo is way cooler and better than George Harrison. Well, now that I think about it, there's others that think that George Harrison's overrated, because there's people out there that think the Beatles are overrated. And you'll probably see it in the comments below, and I respect your opinion. If you all don't dig the Beatles, that's all right. Whatever, man. I love the Beatles. I think they're the greatest band ever. My favorite band's Black Sabbath, Merciful Fate, but the greatest band, in my opinion, is the Beatles. And people think they're overrated or whatever, man. I don't. And I'm also pretty fascinated at the fact that the Beatles are the only band that changed the world. They literally changed the world in 7 years. They only were around for 7 years, and see what they accomplished. So yeah, I know a lot of people think they're overrated, and that's fine. You think that? I don't. A lot of you would probably put Ringo at the bottom, but and a lot of you would put Harrison at the top, and that's cool, you know. But you know, me and stubborn ass Ian, you know, we're always gonna think Harrison is the overrated Beatle. So thank you all for watching The Only News That Matters. You all rule. Even you people that think Harrison is the best Beatle, you rule. All of you rule. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Ring that little notification bell. I would appreciate that. And please like the video. It's good for the YouTube algorithms. So stay frosty. Listen to Black Sabbath and Rubber Soul. And smack 'em a gob.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain. For we've received orders for to sail back to Boston. And so never more shall we see you again.